And that right there is free game.
Just so.
That right there is free game. What up, people? Flip Your Worth TV. New day, new vlog, same hustle. You know the motto. So today, as you see in the title, it's gonna be one of my free game videos, which means I'm gonna give you some free game and some real estate talk and drop some information on you that will hopefully be really informative and help you with your flipping career. Right now though, I'm actually about to jump in the car because I'm en route to one of my other properties to check them out, make sure that everything is going how it's supposed to be going. But while I'm in the car, I'm gonna give you those 5 pointers to stick to. So get your pen and pad ready, take some notes, and let's do this. So one of the first things that you have to be on point with when it comes to flipping houses is you have to know your budget. So number 1 is budget. Now, budget is actually going to be split into 2 separate categories, but we'll start off with the first part. With the budget, you want to make sure that you know exactly what you're spending on this house. And what you're spending will include everything. That will include the purchase of the house. That will include the renovation of the house. That will include the closing costs to buy the house. And that will also include the closing costs when you sell the house. Now, these are a lot of things that people tend to not add, and they only think about buying and selling. They don't think about all the costs that come in between that. Now, that's really important because at the end of the day, you have to add anything that will take away from the money that you can earn. All those things are factors that will control the amount of money that you make on the return. So you want to make sure that you budget for all of those. So number 2 is budget. I know first one was the budget, but as I told you, this is going to be a kind of a 2-part phase. In this aspect with the budget, you want to make sure that you know exactly what you're spending on your renovation, because that's crucial. You want to make sure that you try to cover every area that you can and kind of plan for whatever may pop up without you expecting it. And that's kind of hard to do. To an extent it is, but it's not. Like when I do my budgets, I just plan for everything to go wrong. And what would it cost to replace everything? That's, to me, that's just the safest way. But that's not always the easiest way to do things, because it may make you budget for a lot more than you need to. But at the same time, it's not really a bad thing, because imagine you budget for a high amount just to be safe. But then when you actually do the renovations, those things that you budgeted for that you didn't need to fix, well, they actually work out well for you so that you don't have to fix it. Well, that's a good problem, because that means all that money that you budgeted for, you actually saved and didn't spend. So that's not a problem. But where it gets tricky, and this happens to the best of them, it happens to me, it hasn't failed where I've been working on a house, I've been doing a flip, and I thought I planned for everything, and then something that I did not plan for, something extremely random, just pops up. Sometimes it's a major thing, sometimes it's just a minor thing, but something always pops up. So I say that to say, pay attention to your budget, because that's very, very important. And you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you didn't plan properly for your renovation, and you think that this budget is going to be $40,000, or you had budgeted for $50,000, and then you start doing the work on the job and your budget blows up to $80,000. And that may sound crazy, but it's not that crazy, because I definitely was working on a house one time and the budget was $90,000 for the renovation, and that budget ended up being about $160,000 when I was finished. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's like a real thing. You don't want to have that problem, because I know I didn't want to have that problem. Number 3, know your comps. And for those who don't know what comps are, I did a previous video. You'll have to go back and look at one of them where I break it down. But a short summary of what a comp is pretty much telling you what your house or the house that you want to buy is worth. So they will take sales from within a mile, sometimes less than a mile. That's, to me, that's more accurate. When you do like a quarter mile, half a mile, it's even more accurate than a mile. But on average, people will take sales from a mile from wherever your property is at, or like, you know, within that neighborhood. And that will determine kind of what your house is worth to an extent. There's certain factors, but they're going to look for a house that's very similar to yours, similar square footage, similar neighborhood, similar characteristics. And based off what that house sold for, those type of houses, what they sell for, will help determine what your house is worth. So if you got a house that the houses in that neighborhood are selling at $300,000, you buy a house for $200,000 that needs $60,000 of work. Some people will say, oh, $200,000 house, I'm buying it for $200,000. These houses over here worth $300,000. That's a good deal. Well, it depends. Like I said, if you buy the house for $200,000, it needs $60,000 of work. Well, that's just $60,000 that you know of. Again, what if you have some unforeseen circumstances? Well, now that $60,000 may go up. But even if it doesn't, you buy for $200,000, you spend $60,000 on a renovation. Now you have closing costs. You're going to have closing costs on the purchase side, and you're going to have closing costs on the selling side. Now, I'm going to just do a rough guess off the top of my head. Let's just say when you buy it, your closing costs are 10 grand. Let's say when you sell it, your closing costs are 10 grand. When you sell it, your closing costs are going to be a little higher because of the purchase price. So, I mean, not necessarily it's going to be higher, but there's a lot of factors that will determine whether it's higher or not. But the percentage, the agent percentage, the 3% that you would pay to the agent, and you don't have to use an agent, but it's a whole nother conversation. That'll be for another vlog. But the 3% that you pay to an agent, obviously 3% is going to be higher on a sale of $300,000 than on a sale of $200,000. So let's just say your first the closing cost to buy is $10,000, and then your closing cost to sell, even though it's gonna be higher than 10, it's $10,000. Well, that's $20,000 altogether. Your renovation was $60,000. You purchased it for $200,000. All in right now, you're at $280,000. You sell it for $300,000. That's a $20,000 profit. Now, granted, that's also if it went perfect and everything fit into that $60,000 budget. Now, some will say, yes, $20,000, that's a great profit. $20,000 is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, I know people that don't do flips that are under $40,000, $50,000. They don't even want to touch it. I know people that will do flips and be happy making $10,000. What you make off it I can't tell you is good or not. That's all within somebody's own personal finances and whatever they feel is necessary or whatever they feel is good for them. But you're all in at 280. You sold it for 300. But one thing that you didn't factor in, which a lot of people tend to not factor in, is holding time. We're talking about a perfect scenario here, as if you finish the house and you put it up on the market and it sells next day. That's not the perfect scenario. I've had houses that sold, got an offer the first day, but I've had houses that sat for 3 to 6 months. So, and you can't really predict that. So you got to also factor in what your closing costs are going to be on that house for, let's say, 6 months. What if your mortgage on that house is $1,500? Well, if you held that house for 6 months, then do the math. You're now talking about $9,000 to hold that house for 6 months. Well, you just spent $9,000 just on a mortgage. So now where we at? $289. Did you factor in the electricity bill, the gas bill, the taxes? It's a lot of other things that can add up. If it's a house in a certain community, and the time, depending on the time of the year, you might have to have a gardener there if you're not doing it yourself. So there's a lot of things that add up. Your outside bills over the course of 6 months could be another $5,000. So think about this. Let's say those other bills are another $5,000. Well, now you were at 289. You add another $5,000 on there. You're at 294. You sold that house for 300. You made $6,000. You held that house for 6 months. Was $6,000 worth it to you for 6 months? Like, for you to work on something for 6 months and make $6,000, is that worth it to you? I can't say it is. I can't say it's not. That's solely up to you and your own discretion. But again, that's why you got to know your comps. That's why that's also a very important factor. Number 4, contractor. Now, that's actually one of the more popular questions that I get asked all the time. It's how do you find your contractor? And to be honest, there's not really a good, like a guaranteed solution to finding a good contractor. Unfortunately, it's really just trial and error. Because the easy thing to say is, just go use somebody that's been recommended to you by somebody else. That's a good start. But here's the problem. Everybody doesn't have the same criteria for what they look for. And what's good for you may not be good for me, vice versa. Your contractor's personality may work great for your personality. Doesn't mean it's going to work great for my personality. Things that I require for my contractors, you might not require for yours. I might look at certain work that your contractor did and think, it's not the greatest. You might look at that same work and think it was incredible. So, using somebody that has been referred to you can be good, but don't take that as an automatic, because it can also be bad. I've had people that were referred to me and I used them and they were terrible. And I have had people that I work along with really well and that I think are very good contractors, and I've sent them to other people and they didn't get along. Like, it didn't work. Not because the work wasn't good. It's just they didn't mesh well together. The personalities clashed. So at the end of the day, the only thing I can tell you about finding a contractor is trial and error. And it's an unfortunate thing. But here's a way of getting around that trial and error. Don't give a contractor the whole job. You test them out. Give them small sample sizes. So if you're flipping a house, instead of giving the contractor all the flooring, all the paint, all the drywall work, all of that stuff, use different contractors and give them each one of those things. And whoever you feel like does the best work, whoever you feel like does it in the most timely fashion but has the best product, well, now expand. Give them something else. And If that goes well, now you know you have at least one contractor that you can rely on. And if you give him one thing and he doesn't do that well, then he may not be the best contractor. But that's also not an automatic, because certain contractors excel at one thing and maybe not at others. Quick example, I have one contractor that I use all the time. I've tried to give him projects to work on where I say, hey, you know what? Take this whole project. He was terrible at it. And I gave him two different houses to work on, like two different projects. And he was terrible at both of them. But what he's amazing at is cabinetry and installing glass. So whenever I need glass work done, or whenever I need custom cabinets or cabinets in general installed, I call him. He does a perfect job every time. He nails it. But I will never give him another job again where he is the general contractor for the whole project, because that's just not his strong suit. Like, he's not good at it. So again, contractors are trial and error thing. And unfortunately, those errors can be big errors. And those issues can be real headaches. But when you sign up for flipping houses, be prepared for the headaches, because it's not like TV. Everything isn't going to get done in 30 minutes and look perfect. There's a lot of headaches. And number 5, to me, is very important. And that right there is timelines. Know your timelines. When you work with contractors, keep them on a strict timeline. Because a lot of these contractors, remember, they're getting paid as long as they do the work. But you are losing money the longer you hold that house. They don't care how long it takes for the house to be finished, as long as they get paid. You need to care about that. Because the longer you hold that house, those bills add up. And those carrying costs add up. And as in the previous example I gave you, holding that house for 6 months, $5,000 can go like that if you don't stay on top of your timeline. So you want to make sure that you keep your contractors on a very strict timeline. Every week you have a game plan for them, like, hey, this is what I need to be done. And that's why you got to educate yourself on how long it should take certain things to get done. If it's a small house, painting it shouldn't take 3 weeks to paint. So if the guys are taking 3 weeks to paint the house, they're screwing you, and you're about to lose a lot of money and time. That should take 3 to 4 days at most if it's a very small house. But you got to know, you got to be educated on how long it takes to get certain things done, which is also under the timeline factor. So make sure you know your timelines. Make sure that you keep the contractor on pace. Now, granted, as we talked about earlier, there's always going to be unforeseen circumstances. Things will happen that you did not plan for. But even with that, when those things pop up, you want to make sure that you get your guys back on track, and make sure that those things are taken care of in a timely fashion. Because remember, as the old saying goes, time is money. And when it comes to flipping houses, that is not just a saying. That statement could not be any truer. So yeah, that's the summary, man. Those are the 5 things that are extremely important. Those are the things that you need to make sure you're on top of if you want to succeed in flipping houses, because you don't want to fail. And don't be afraid to fail, because sometimes the biggest lessons you will learn, it comes from failing. But still, you want to try to avoid it. So again, the 5 things are budget and budget. The first budget is knowing everything it's going to cost, from purchasing the house, closing costs, buying and selling, closing costs, and renovation. Knowing your whole entire budget of all expenses. The second part is budget also, but that budget is for knowing and staying on top of your renovation costs. Third is knowing your comps, knowing what the house is worth when you buy it, and knowing what the house is worth when you plan to sell it. The fourth thing is the contractors. And of course, the fifth is knowing your timelines. But on that note, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully this information is beneficial for you. And that right there is free game. Subscribe to the channel, Flip Your Worth TV, and I'll drop more vids for y'all soon.